Welcome to another episode of the Phoenix Rising podcast, journeys of descending into the mysteries and rising from the roots. I am your host, Lisa Hillier, spiritual mentor and priestess. I have guided hundreds of women through my one-to-one mentorship, online courses, and Patreon portal into the mysteries within them to rise rooted into their sovereign selves. And I am so grateful that you are here listening to the podcast. And if you want to support the podcast and its creation in any way, please give the show a 5-star rating, write a review, follow, share, or join the Patreon portal. And the Patreon portal is a powerful community of humans rising into their highest self with tools and practices, embodiment, all kinds of magic. And the link for the Patreon portal is in the show notes. And today I have Nina Petruzzo on the show with me. And Nina is a faith-based and feminine leadership mentor who is devoted to supporting women in restoring their relationship with God and reclaiming their beloved identity. She is passionate about helping women resurrect the fullness of their feminine essence and the love that beats within their hearts to liberate their lives, relationships, and businesses. She is the hostess of the Rising Feminine Collective podcast and founder of Way of Grace. She offers community ceremonies, group programs, and one-to-one mentorship for women all over the world. And this is such a beautiful, juicy, potent episode, and I can't wait to sink into it with you. Welcome, Nina. And to start, we're going to start with the question of what has been the journey that has led you to the work that you're offering the world today.
Oh, well, Lisa, just thank you so much for having me on and being in this beautiful co-creative conversation. I adore your podcast. So it's really fun to be here and connect our communities in this way. And yeah, what a question. I was reflecting upon this, and there's a lot of pathways that I for sure could go and take this down. But what always comes up for me the most when I reflect upon, what has led me, really to who I am and the work that I do today, the resounding response always is my body. I feel my body has been my greatest teacher from a very young age. I grew up as a very sensitive and intuitive and creative and a little bit boisterous and courageous child. And I spent, just a lot of time being in nature and communing with what I now know to be God and spirit, and spending a lot of time, just alone, but never feeling alone, and always feeling this just deep presence and connection to something bigger than me, but it was always felt through the vessel of my own body. And I grew up as a dancer my whole life. I practiced ballet for a number of years. Like 21 years of my life was dedicated to dance, and dance was a beautiful, beautiful practice for me. But in that sense, I was really meeting my body from a place of more discipline instead of, devotion, and definitely developed some more rigid habits with my body through my path of dance, and kind of used dance as an outlet to help, some of my own emotions moving through, but also really also kind of elicited a lot of my own perfectionist and kind of type A tendencies. I grew up as a very regimented child in many ways, and that is partially due to my familial environment and having a lot of instability in my home life. So I kind of learned how to walk on eggshells and not really ruffle any feathers and be a good girl. But dance was an outlet for me to be in my body and be connected to myself and sensations through the movement and rhythms of dance. And then later in my 20s and college led me into a career in which I deeply studied the body as an occupational therapist. So I really was always, just fascinated by the body and how the body works. And also knowing that we are beyond a body and that we house a spirit, and just being so interested in both the very practical and scientific, but also the very, like metaphysical and mystical aspects of the body. And then in college too, I was led to yoga, and yoga is really where I kind of transformed being in my body from a place of discipline to a place of devotion. And yoga gifted me so many beautiful things and gave me an even deeper outlet to feel and to sense and to listen and connect to my intuition in deeper ways and my emotions and really the heart and the truth of who I am. So that was a beautiful path that I was on for a number of years, and I taught yoga for a number of years while I was a therapist. And then it was later in my 20s when I went through a little bit of a health crisis after going off birth control. And I'm sure a lot of women can relate, but I had a ton of deficiencies and a lot of gut health issues when I transitioned off of the pill, which brought me into an even deeper initiation and journey with my body through functional healing and medicine and exploring that path. And it was really through that journey, which, at the time felt like a crisis, and like so much was dissolving because my health was in crisis. It really deepened me into my body and really helped me to land, into my heart, into my body, into my womb, and to really listen on deeper levels and to attune to the different layers and rhythms of my body, and really connected me, I feel, back into my intuition and back into the oracular power of my womb, because we know that gets very suppressed when you're on birth control. So it was kind of like this opening and expansion back into myself. But after I went through a lot of that healing, I had quite a few, experiences that were more like dark nights of the souls in that. I'm sure we can go into that, but the body was always my path and always my guide. And I had a later, experience through my body in which I had a really profound encounter with God, and it just always brought me back to the body, really having the body be this place in which our truth is resurrected and the wholeness of who we are is remembered. And just like bringing us back into this fullness of love that beats from our hearts. And my body has been the portal for that in my many years of healing and working deep with complex trauma, both in my profession, but also in my own journey, inspired me to help and support and serve other women, and really coming home to their bodies and their hearts and their truth to awaken and liberate, their fullness, their feminine essence, the heart of who they are. And also now in the current chapter of my work, really restoring women's remembrance of being a cherished and chosen daughter of God, and really reclaiming their beloved identity through, again, the vessel of their body, and really resurrecting the church that beats in their own hearts. So it's always been about the body for me, and I am devoted to being in the body and listening, and just walking beside other women in this journey, because it's so easy for us to dissociate and go outside of ourselves and live from our mind. We're really conditioned to do that. But I feel there is such a reclamation, especially that's been happening in the last, few years, of really coming home and really being rooted and anchored into our body, and really trusting this feminine path of dissension and arriving into the deeper layers of ourselves that are housed from within, not outside, or not through ascension and reaching, and looking outside of ourselves.
Beautiful. There's so many threads there that I want to pull from, little pathways that we could follow. But what I would love to touch on is the complex trauma. Can you speak to what is complex trauma, and also how it's stored in the body, how trauma and the body are so interwoven together, and just even if this comes up with it, but how we've been so conditioned to be outside of our body. What's the first kind of entry point to coming back into the body?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So many layers within that. And I definitely don't have perfect answers, but I'll, explore this the best that I can. And I find like we're just to call out that we are so conditioned to be out of our bodies and we're
Mm.
so conditioned into a world of urgency, of striving, of performing, of reaching, of, kind of climbing up this illusionary hierarchy and going and doing and just like constant motion. And many of us don't know how to slow down and to be and to rest, in the sacredness of stillness and really trust in the fertility of the unknown and the pause and the in between. And I deeply, deeply believe, our healing only happens in slow motion spaces. So, when we do have in store trauma, which is held, deeply in the body and trauma is, super complex and we all have experienced it in some way throughout our lifetime. And, those traumas, eliciting deeper wounds of abandonment, betrayal, rejection, humiliation, injustice, all the things that each of us have faced at some point in our life. And trauma is really, our reaction to a certain experience in our life. And I always think of like trauma. I think that Kimberly Ann Johnson describes it this way, but I love this visual is like getting this huge piece of cake and it coming into your mouth, but you not knowing how to assimilate and break down and digest that piece of cake and that
Mm.
cake representing the experience that you're meeting. So, then it gets stored in the body, and held as a hurt and a wound. And again, like a deeper trauma that then elicits a response. So then, we will meet it again in some way. It might be through a different experience, but then it elicits our bodies back into that original condition response from the first experience. But what I feel is so beautiful and wonderful, and I feel again that this is kind of like one of God's gifts, is that we're always going to be given opportunities to use our trauma as a teacher and really to help us support our integration and essentially our evolution. I see trauma being like a little scratch in our life record, but we're going to be gifted time and time again opportunities to repair that scratch and to reshape the experience or the perception that we now hold from the experience and to reshape our beliefs and our feelings and ultimately our behaviors so that then we're able to meet our life in a totally renewed way. But to do that, we have to slow down and we have to come into the body, right? Because if we're just in reaction mode constantly, we give no space for recalibration to happen. So, this is where, in a lot of the work that I did in supporting families and children with complex trauma for a number of years as an occupational therapist and my approach and my studies in that were very body based, so really working with the soma, really coming into these deeper somatic practices to help really reestablish safety in the body again, and this is also for me in my own journey. And for me, one of the most powerful ways to do that is really coming into intimate communion again with our breath. The breath
Mm.
is an extension to me of the Holy Spirit, and really the breath is life, and the breath offers us a renewal of life. When we really take the time to breathe, we give ourselves an opportunity to really recalibrate our own cellular memory and the remembrance that's running through our holy waters. So the breath is, to me, one of the most fundamental tools that we can utilize. And so many of us forget to breathe. We're,
Mm.
especially as women, we hold everything in. For years, I was a reverse breather. One of my yoga teachers pointed this out to me. I would contract and pull my stomach in as I inhaled, which is a trauma response. And when I exhaled is when I would let go, but I really didn't let go. I always was holding it in because a lot of my stored trauma and emotions and in the suppression of that was just contained in my body for so many years and never really feeling safe to be who I am and to be in the fullness of that. So working with the breath and really deepening the breath, and again letting the breath descend, especially from more of an upper place like in the chest to drop down into the belly, into the solar plexus, really down into the root, is really healing and ultimately through the breath, we can also tone, the vagal nerve, which is so connected. It's like it's our communication channel through the body. And there's tons of tools and practices, that we can do to really support and resource the nervous system and to, recalibrate the tone of our vagus nerve and all the things. But to like bring the most simple tool in, I would say the breath. Slow, deep, full, diaphragmatic breathing is so healing. And really, breath brings us back into presence, because when we're breathing, we're really landing back into the posture of our own presence. And when we're in that awareness, we can then listen to the language of the body, which arrives to us through sensation. And we have to be able to feel and understand sensation to then be able to shift patterns, behaviors, beliefs, all of the things. But it has to come down to that really deep physiological level first before anything else can reshape itself.
Beautiful. With that, the vagus nerve, am I saying that correctly? The
Yeah.
vagus nerve?
Yeah.
Okay. And nervous system regulation. This is a question that I've been asked quite a bit from women, and something that I'm exploring on my own journey as well. Just nervous system regulation, trauma, and how they're, interwoven, and how to regulate the nervous system to not go into disassociation. And I'm speaking specifically in relationship to men. That's been coming up a lot in my field, in my own life, and where I notice I just disassociate or whatever it might be because of very real experiences in the past. And so with that, how do we start to regulate the nervous system to feel safe in, it can be specifically in relationship to men or just in general as well? What's that look like?
Yeah. Oh, I love these questions, Lisa. You are like, turning on the geeky side of me today. And I really am going to have fun with this. Yeah. And what you're bringing up is so fundamental. It's like, until we feel safe with ourselves, we're never going to feel safe with anything else, and what I really learned, and especially through growing my business, if I didn't have that anchored and embodied safety with me and receiving me, I was never going to be able to receive, money, clients, men, my desires, all the things. So this safety piece is really, really, really foundational. And, there's some layers to go in with this, but really starting with the body again, that deep rooted safety is going to come from slowing down or slow motion spaces, because the nervous system itself is a system of communication that's communicating through all of our senses, through our sight, through our sound, through touch, through feeling, through, how we're experiencing the world sensationally. That's all getting taken into our nervous system and being integrated. And often for many of us, alarms are just like going off constantly, right? Based on our past experiences and our trauma and our own sensory system. It's like fires often everywhere that then cause us to either dissociate or flee or freeze and, just like can't move, lacking action, or even to fight back, to be really reactive and maybe moving emotions in a more unhealthy way, from a state of reaction instead of response, and being responsible, for our emotional states. So this is where, again, our healing is going to start by slowing down. And for me, and I feel for a lot of women, a lot of this safety really starts to become established when we start to connect back to the earth. So for me, it was really developing a relationship again with the earth, like quite literally feeling my feet against the ground, like feeling my body against the earth, like whether it's sitting with a tree or even just in my chair, like especially when we're in a state of dissociation, it's really, really, really powerful for us to lean into physical support. So support from the environment. So again, might be leaning against a tree leaning against your chair, pressing the soles of your feet down into the earth, pressing the hands into a wall or into, the earth below you, into the floor, like giving yourself the ability to come back to the body, to feel, to sense, to, be in a relationship with something that is stable and grounded and essentially not moving and shifting in the moment, like letting yourself have that experience of being held. So for me, that container at first was the earth, and kind of using the earth, and then also understanding how to slow down and be in my body and offer more presence there so that I wasn't fleeing and dissociating, because that was definitely a pattern of mine too. And again, that can be, again, deeper breaths. It can be rubbing the hands, letting the hands press against the thighs, or rubbing the tops of the thighs is really, again, calming and toning for the vagus nerve, giving yourself gentle squeezes, anything that's really bringing you back into experiencing your body again is really powerful to kind of start to break that dissociation response. And then when you're in the body, you can start to attune to sensation and just witness what's going on. Like you might even say to yourself, I feel numb through my extremities, or my fingers are tingling, or there's a knot in my belly, or I feel tightness in my throat. Like just even beginning to have that awareness of listening and then really being able to notice what's happening is how you're developing that deeper relationship with your body again. And again, it sounds so simple, but these are really powerful things to bring you back into yourself and establish that inner safety. And then, my journey kind of took me into another place. And this was really just in the last couple of years. A lot of my own safety is really through my connection and communion in relationship with God. And that was also a huge part of my healing with the masculine, was really coming back into relationship with the masculine face of God and really developing a deep relationship with Christ. And that's, another huge piece I can talk to, if you want to go there, Lisa. But that was a big piece of me healing with the masculine, was really coming back to relationship with God and feeling held, in God's frame, and really leaning into God as my ultimate container of safety. And to be able to do that, is big, because often for many of us, we have to really untangle all the distortions around God and untangle a lot of the untruths that we've been programmed and conditioned into about God, whether that's from the new age or religion or whatever programming we've had that has made us uncomfortable or feeling unsafe with God, and developing again our own unique relationship with our creator and remembering who God is, which to me is love, and who we actually are in God's image, which is the beloved. And really that reclamation, which is a felt experience. It's nothing that we can learn or analyze or be in the logical mind about. This for me really is through embodied conviction, no doctrine, no dogma, no like structural thing can really gift us this. It's really a felt experience through the body, in which we come back to that relationship and then get to lean into that frame to help us deepen our own inner safety. Because I feel so much of our lack of safety in general, as humanity, is because we do have such a core separation wound of separation from our creator. And then ultimately, then that separation causes us separation from ourselves and from the truth of who we are, and to question who we are and to question who God is. And essentially it kind of promotes us all walking around like orphans, on this earth, really not knowing our wholeness and our worthiness and our innate belonging, as children, as beloved daughters, as beloved sons, of God itself. So, when I get to like the root of why we feel unsafe, for me, it comes back to that separation wound. So really doing deep healing with that. And, another piece of the safety is also, for me, for a long time, it was inner child healing. So a lot of too where we don't feel safe is because of those really deep wounds that we've experienced, through childhood, often from like 0 to 11 is where a lot of our
Mm.
conditioning is formed, and our subconscious is really like becoming integrated. And, now our brain is like 90% plus acting from that place. So it's a lot of love and compassion and nurturance, to those parts that feel hurt, that are holding wounds. And often too, that will bring us into a deeper process of forgiveness and really opening to deeper levels and layers of grace for ourselves and also for others, which for me, when we can forgive, we open more space in our bodies to be able to receive, whether that's, men, the masculine, God, life, money, all of the things. If we haven't fully reconciled and forgiven, our past hurts and our perceptions, we're going to keep acting from those ingrained patterns and, beliefs that we've had for so long that are rooted from, where the trauma is living from and where our hurts have been stored.
Mm. With that piece of God and coming back into that relationship of, I love like the adored and cherished daughter of
Yeah.
God, that the beloved, was there a, a point in your life when that connection wasn't there, when the relationship wasn't there?
Yeah.
And then what did it look like to start to establish that union? I think I'll just touch on this before I give you the space to answer that question. But, I've spoken about it quite a bit on my podcast that I went through the darkest night of my soul just over a year ago. And it was so gut wrenching and brought me to my knees in so many ways. But it also led me to this reclamation of union with the masculine face of God. And why I bring that up is so many people can be going through these dark nights of the soul, really, really hard times, and think like, what is this for? Like, why is this happening to me? And I think just, speaking to that is it's all happening for you most often. From my own experience, I can speak to that it is happening for this deeper remembrance
Yeah.
to occur. Yeah.
Yeah, I had chills when you were just saying that. And yeah, this journey with God has been the most profound experience of my life. I'm pretty certain it is for everybody who really comes back into this, yeah, relationship and union and experience with the creator. And, I'm really fortunate because in many ways I didn't get indoctrinated into a lot of religious trauma growing up. I have always been like a very, very spiritual person, and especially child. Like I was always seeking truth. I was always in the mystical. I was always a writer. I mean, I wrote poetry from like age 7. Like I've always been in this exploration of like, what else is here, like, and again, I always felt the presence of God from a very young age, and I did always feel the presence of Christ. And I grew up in Methodist church where, again, my perception of God was love. Like there wasn't a lot of dogma and like harmful doctrine, at least that I can remember, that kind of maybe, would have pushed me away from God. But with that being said, growing up in this world, we all are consciously or unconsciously, affected by religion, by church empire, and by, the distortions in the world, around God. So, definitely kind of in my later teens and early 20s, I went through like my own little rebellious phase, kind of like breaking out of all my good girl and perfectionist, discipline that I had regimented my whole life. And I went into a big exploration and kind of lost myself, and also felt a little bit lost in that connection with God for many years. And then I was exploring, a lot of paths, a lot of different world religions, and yeah, just different things, some of everything, I feel has truth and untruth. So just kind of moving into these different realms. And for a long time, I, referred to, God more unconsciously just as like universe or
Mm.
source, or more of this energy that felt like a big cosmic blob, like not a personal relationship, just like, okay, I know that something's bigger, but I'm afraid to call it God because people are triggered by God. I'm triggered by God right now. Like I don't really know what to speak of this. And then, kind of similar to you, Lisa, it was in 2017 that I went through my darkest night of the soul, and I had moved to the East Coast. I'd been living in California for a number of years. I moved back home for a relationship. And it was, kind of like, I don't necessarily believe in twin flame relationships, but it definitely was like a soul. It was a very intense relationship. So it was like, all the things, all the wounds, all the hurts, all the traumas, like everything colliding into each other. And I was, in my late 20s. I think had just turned 28, moving back home to my parents' house, as a young adult, or as an adult, as an adult woman, which again brought up a ton of things and a ton of triggers living with my mom and dad again. And, during that time, I had gotten pregnant and I decided to have an abortion because I just knew that the relationship was not healthy. And ultimately, where I was in life at that time, it wasn't, you know, I have different feelings on abortion today, but I'm not going to go into that completely here because I could go on a whole tangent, but it just wasn't in alignment at that moment. So I made the hardest choice of my life, and it brought me down into the depths of my own darkness. And I went through a period of 2 years of deep grief, of depression, of anxiety, of heartache, of pain. And I remember through that experience, just coming down onto my knees and crying out for God. It wasn't universe, it wasn't source, it was God. And I started to pray, although I didn't really know I was praying. I was just having like a conversation, just exposing the vulnerabilities of my heart and the pain that I was feeling so immensely. And in that moment that I started to speak to God, I did begin to feel a more personal presence around me. And I felt something bigger than me was holding me and was there for me and was going to shine a light, in those darkest moments when I felt like I couldn't get out of bed or was just struggling, so much. And I've always been a really energetic, optimistic person. I'd never experienced the depths of that kind of darkness in my life. And the only way I know I got through it was because God was holding my hand and God was with me. And I could feel the light and illumination, shining through me and from me, through starting to develop a relationship. And in that period of life too, I went through a huge, huge process of forgiveness, and to forgive that deeply, myself, my ex-partner, my family, all of the things. I knew that God had to be in the room to be able to give me the grace to go into that level of forgiveness, that I'd been resisting honestly for a lot of my life, and to meet a lot of those past wounds and traumas with more grace and compassion and acceptance. So I was beginning to develop a relationship with God then. And then after those 2 years, I ended up moving to Colorado, which was like a total reactivation for me and a renewal in my heart and in my energy. And I got to Colorado and for the first time lived on my own and was, really invited to step into the community and make friends and build a sisterhood and, yeah, connect into a place that I had no roots and kind of recreate my whole life. And again, God gifted me the courage to do that. I couldn't have done that without him. And it was during that time when I was spending a lot of time alone, in my apartment or on the mountains, hiking with my dog, that I continued to feel this presence. Because at the time in my dark night of the soul, it's like I was speaking to God. I was beginning to feel like, again, there was a relationship building, but I didn't really have like a deep understanding of who God was then. It was just starting to cultivate. So it was more so in 2019 and then eventually in 2020 that I was really starting to pray more powerfully and more intentionally. And I was sitting on my bed on a Sunday morning in August of 2020. And I just sat on my bed and I was praying for truth. I just said, God, please show me truth. Please show me truth. Show me truth. And I think because I was so open and receptive at that time, my heart was so open. In that moment when I was praying for truth, I had this profound encounter, like this image of Christ on the cross just came right into my fields. And it felt like I was pierced with a sword. My entire heart shattered open. I viscerally like went back towards the wall behind me. And there was this love that I had never felt, but like
Mm.
probably not since I was a child. It just felt like this huge, unsayable, massive frequency of love that just flooded my entire heart. And it took down every wall, every shield, every armor that I didn't even know I was carrying, because there was this quite literal cracking open that happened. And I got down on my knees by the side of my bed and I just was saying, God, I hand over my will to thy will, let me yield my control to your holy vision, let me decrease so that you can increase. Like I hand over my life to you. And, a lot of people in the Christian, realm would say I was saved. And it did feel to a degree like there was like this beautiful, I don't like to say it's a saving. To me, it was like this divine remembrance and really this
Mm.
resurrection and this full restoration of my heart, of my spirit, of the remembrance of my identity. Because in that moment, God kept whispering like so powerfully, I'm with you. I've never left you. I'm with you. I've never left you. Remember, remember, remember who you are. You are my daughter. And
Mm.
I love you so much. And that has never changed from any moment in your life. So it was like this flood of grace. And that really was immensely beautiful. And then also overwhelming to a degree, like the amount of love that I'd felt. And then I also was a little bit confused, like after coming out of that experience again, just like on my bed, totally sober, like just
Mhm.
like from this prayer. And I didn't have anybody at the time who had a relationship with Christ or God. So I was like, I don't know who to talk to about this. I felt like, okay, I don't feel like I'm supposed to go to like religion and go right to church. Like, I don't know where to go. And kind of what I found was some of like the new age to Jesus communities, which again, aren't bad, but I just didn't land there. Like, again, I felt there was a lot of dogma in kind of harm in that space in some ways. So, I just kept praying to God, and God just said like, I, have your hand, and I'm going to lead you into the gospel. And I also was really led to Mary Magdalene in different ways than I had been before, really to look at the women of the Bible and look at the devotional posture that they held to Christ, and just how much Christ revered and loved women, and they were a huge part of his ministry. So, God took me down a lot of paths and brought me, some different pastors that I really, really respect and admire, and who helped me heal some of the unconscious wounds that I had with God. But I was in this like a year and a half season of really getting to know God's heart and character again, and also wrestling with God, like asking some hard questions. I knew the some of the Old Testament, and the God in that scripture is not the God that I serve and know. So I had some like really big things that I had to reconcile, and I took time, and the whole time, I just kept hearing God say like, take your time, take your time. Like, this is meant to just be
Mm.
between me and you for a while. Like, really just let me restore your heart, and take your time to build trust and intimacy with me. Like, just like any relationship, it doesn't happen overnight. And to me, relationship with God does ask us into this trust, this intimacy, this building process, together, of slowly exposing and opening our hearts and being vulnerable, and beginning to, really be more led and more held, in God's embrace. So I was in that journey for quite a while. And then I kept praying for sisters who I could connect with. And God, luckily, eventually blessed me with, a group of women. Some of those women have been on your podcast. And
Mm.
I'm so indebted to God and so grateful for Him bringing that sisterhood to me, because also being in that sisterhood with other women who are walking with Christ, in this way that I was, this way that truly felt like truth and harmony and love and grace and restoration, was felt rare to find. And a lot of those women have gifted me, the courage to show up, in my own journey, and, in my calling, and to have, a beautiful devotional relationship with God that I feel now, emboldened enough to share and to publicly speak on. But yeah, it was really that experience and that encounter that brought me back into this remembrance of love. And again, it's something that I feel is to be experienced, and it will be different for all of us. God to me is the resurrection of a deep inner knowing, an instinct within yourself of, the relationship with the divine that you get to have, and we'll find it in different ways, but ultimately it's meant to be rooted in the fullness of love. I always say, like, whatever is bringing you closer to love is bringing you closer to God. Whatever doesn't feel like love, is not of God. And to really trust that discernment in yourself, because it's, so many will then kind of go into scripture and almost become more invested in like the Bible than they are to relationship. And we see this, throughout the world and through religion. And it breaks my heart that this divine relationship has been compromised and has been kind of dismantled from us in many ways. So there is a huge reconciliation in this journey that we are asked to embark upon.
Yeah, that reconciliation just speaks to that reconciliation that's happening with men and women at this time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what I really receive from that is it starts with the reconciliation with God for many women on this path. And I love that you brought Mary Magdalene into the conversation, and that divine union that took place that was of devotion. Are there any books that come to mind for you that speak to cultivating that relationship with God, or Mary Magdalene, Yeshua, any books? And then also I'm going to throw in like another question here. Just when you speak to that devotion with God, how does that mirror out to devotion with men, like the men in our lives?
Yeah. Oof. I just love all these questions, because in what you spoke about the union piece, I fully believe, our union is asked first to be with God and to learn how to be held with God, both as men and women, really like re-anchoring that relationship in our life to be able to be in the fullness of a loving union with another. If we don't know who we are and we're still acting in that orphan consciousness and, seeking our wholeness out in the world, like we're never going to be able to be in true embodied union. And again, that rectification of who we are is really found with God, and really coming back to that deeper remembrance. And, there's been a few books on my journey. I am like a book nerd. I'll read a million books. The first thing that comes to mind is, when I was really coming back into relationship with God, I was really led into the Gospel of John, which, is to me the most relational gospel of all the New Testament, gospels. And to me, that really portrays, the love and the ministry of Christ. And there's tons of translations of the Bible that are easier to read, and, so you can like receive it in a way. And I always say, when people go into scripture, you're really meant to receive scripture, from the body, and to pray and to just open to what you're meant to receive, because a lot of it is very allegorical and metaphorical, and it's, has a lot of mystery in it. To me, the Bible is like an unfinished love story. So there's a lot that we don't know within that, but that's a beautiful gospel to begin with. I also really love the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which is a Gnostic text, but the actual Gospel of Mary Magdalene is beautiful because, again, it really shows the steadfast devotion to love that Mary had, and yeah, just the unconditional love that gets to arise through our relationship with God and with Christ. So that's a beautiful one. And yeah, there's a couple other books that I'll send you, Lisa, that are really, really, really lovely for helping to develop deeper relationship. But again, it was a lot of rest. There's one book that's really good, especially if you've had religious trauma. There's a book called Saying No to God, which goes into a lot of the stories in the Old Testament in which, God asks for genocide and child sacrifice and a lot of horrific things, and condone slavery and like these things that we'd be like, what? That is not the God that I know and serve. And it really portrays how many of the prophets wrestled God and resisted God and fought against God. And the author brings such beautiful context into this. And it also speaks to, a lot of these really big, topics that are tied to religion, to help us reconcile, what we get to believe about these things that have become kind of, again, doctrine and ultimately harmful,
Mm.
for us on earth, and have severed a lot of our relationship with God. So that's a great one to kind of go into how to read the Bible more faithfully and like with a new lens, and really connect back to love and remembering God as love. Um, and then I think your other question was it how did it help heal relationship with the masculine, Lisa?
Devotion. Yeah,
Devotion.
devotion
Yeah.
with God, and then how does it
Yeah.
come into devotion
Mm.
to men?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, and this is really beautiful because my experience, and I just wrote an email kind of about this the other day to my email list, but for so many years, and I think a lot of women can relate, when it would have classified myself as like a very independent woman, had gotten my way through college, built this successful career, started my business, made money, saved money, paid off debt, did all on my own. And it's been really interesting because throughout my life, I was always very pursued by highly masculine men. I always had attracted, very masculine men into my fields, men that were
Mm.
devoted and committed and wanted marriage and babies and a home and all of these things. And a huge part of me desired that, but I was very unwilling to give up my own control and really surrender into co-creating a vision with someone else. That was so terrifying to me. And some of that comes from my own deeper abandonment wounds, and some betrayal wounds that I had in earlier relationships. But I really, really, really witnessed like how many walls I actually held around my heart, especially when I came back into this relationship with God and had that encounter to really experience like the layers of walls that I was holding. Because at that time, I even thought like, I'm an embodied woman, like I'm super feminine and, like loving and open and all of these things. And yet, I still had a lot of walls and a lot of resistance, and I really wasn't receiving the masculine and still
Mm.
really pushing the masculine away. So God kind of brought me into, yeah, this deeper devotional space of learning how to be in relationship with him and really softening into my body, into my heart, into my womb, and really trusting that as I continued to just bring my devotion, my love, my heart, my truth, my yearning for service really to him, that he would provide my direction. So it was a lot of giving up of my own control and really
Mm.
surrendering to a lot of the unknown and the great mystery, and really leaning into God and really learning how to be held and really receive, that divine support and frame. Because even in my business, God definitely gave me the initiation into my business, and I feel my business has always been very God led. But there's many places in my business that I was controlling, that I was forcing, that I was pushing, and not really letting God, take the wheel with me. So the whole process itself of devotion really brought me into these deeper states of surrender and submission, which I know, when women hear submission, I feel there's a lot of trigger that can come alive there. But to me, submission isn't, giving your power away. It's really deciding to power with, it's deciding to be in co-creation. It's deciding to cease self-sourcing and striving, and really coming back into collaborative, co-creative union, again, first with God, and trusting that as you rebuild your relationship with God and really deepen into that devotional state, you're going to become more open to the masculine. And it was really a year and a half after restoring my relationship with God that, I met my beloved, and
Mm.
my dear partner who I plan to build my life with and have babies with and all these beautiful things. And it's the first time in my life that I've ever felt so confident in staying and deciding to be here and not leave and not run and not escape or sabotage the relationship, because that was a huge pattern of mine. Because again, I never felt safe, and
Mm.
I never felt like I could give up my control, because if I gave up my control, I would lose some of my own safety. So that's where kind of from the beginning, that safety piece is so big. And then really trusting, as women, we are meant to collaborate with the masculine. We are meant to be in union. We each have our own unique divine gifts, and we're each, created in God's image, but we are not the same. And we are really meant to reconcile our union. To me, devotional union is ultimately liberation on the planet, which is why, there's been so much spiritual warfare and hijack around union, through many realms, because, the enemy knows if we fracture union, we, limit liberation on earth. So it's always been like the primary attack, since the Garden of Eden, the story of creation. This is where it all began, is
Yeah.
really from that original fracture.
Yeah. I don't know if there's any answer to this question, but I think control is a big one. It's been a huge one
Yeah.
in my life. And I think kind of control is the opposite to safety. If we don't feel safe, we want to control because it gives us a false sense
Yeah,
of safety. If I know, then I'm okay. But it's really just an illusion because
totally.
we actually don't control
Yeah.
much, if anything, on this planet. So are there ways, or what have been the ways or steps for you that have allowed you to let go of control? That's a
Mm.
very multi-layered journey. At least it
Yeah.
has been for me. It hasn't been
Oh,
one and done.
me too. And I'm still in the process of exploring this and deepening my devotion to this. And yeah, what you said is so powerful. I think too, when we're in that state of control, we're really attached to a lot of conditions, when women are controlling. I was just having a conversation about this with one of my good friends, when we're trying to control, it's often because we're trying to establish our safety outside of ourselves. So we think that like safety is going to be in the way my man treats me, or in how much money my business is going to make, or what this external thing is going to do for me. So I try to control all of these things and set up these conditions so that I feel safe. But safety itself is an internal state. It's really anchoring that embodied sense of being held and being chosen and being cherished. And yeah, recalibrating the nervous system and finding that inner resourcing to know that no matter what, you are safe. Your safety is guaranteed. You might be uncomfortable at times, but your safety itself will not be compromised. For the most part. Of course, there's traumas and deeper things that happen on earth, unfortunately, that do compromise our safety at times. But in general, for most of the women, I think listening to this, your safety is something inside of you that is cultivated from within. And this process of letting go of control, yeah, has been huge. And for me, it's this big journey of surrender. And again, as women, I think we're really afraid to fully surrender. We're really afraid to fully soften and let down those shields and to put down our armor because we have been hurt. So, it's no wonder. And this is where too, we don't have to make the ways in which that we've controlled wrong or bad or unfeminine. All these ways in which we've controlled have ultimately been protective mechanisms. They have been trying to protect what you feel is your safety. So I always like to look at those things as teachers and as ways that can help us integrate, new patterns, and to not make ourselves wrong in the process, to really offer ourselves that grace and that compassion and that patience and that love to ourselves, as we're unraveling, these entanglements that we've been constricted in, that have made us control throughout our life. And the process itself kind of feels like that, like an unraveling, like really kind of
Mm.
layer by layer, just witnessing, even first for me, it was like witnessing, like, what are my perceptions around controlling? Like, where did I decide that I had to control certain things? Like, where was that belief and perception shaped from? Like, what did maybe compromise my safety? What parts of myself do I need to nurture and again do some of that inner child healing work to
Yeah.
help her feel safe again and feeling surrendered and softening and trusting that she can let her guard down, so that is a lot of that deeper body-based somatic work that we get to do. And then really letting ourselves, navigate the process of surrender itself, which is a massive initiation. I kind of break down surrender into three phases: the desert, the wilderness, and the promised land. And, that desert phase is desolate. When you start to enter this journey of initiation, which is like just a threshold into a new way of being,
Mm.
that desert phase is like a starving. Like you are letting go of everything that you used to know. And this is sometimes a process that takes years, as you're really shedding, a lot of these mechanisms that have been keeping you safe to your,
Mhm.
illusionary, unconscious yearning for safety. It's really brave and courageous to start to look at, these deeper layers and to give yourself the space to let them start to shed. And, for me, it was like spending time in more slow motion spaces, really letting myself trust in the slowing down, in the pause, in cultivating that slowness in my life so that I could have deeper reflection and give myself space to witness and reflect upon, the different places in which I controlled. So that was like prioritizing walks in nature every day, like prioritizing prayer with God, prioritizing like just time to do nothing, which again, for a woman that's very controlling, we're
Yeah.
often not used to doing that. So that's an edge. And to start it small, like to not have to think, oh my gosh, I'm just going to go into surrender and I'm going to be in the abyss for like ever. It's like, our healing really happens in these like small little steps, and it's just taking one step at a time. And then we go to the wilderness and we do start to look, as we slow down and build deeper awareness and listen to the sensation of the body, we start to recognize the patterns, the perceptions, the beliefs, all the things that have been conditioning and controlling and dictating our current behaviors. And that wilderness is really where we're learning to walk in a new way. And we're going to stumble and you're going to trip over some roots, and it's not going to be perfect and it's going to be messy. And again, shifting into a new way of being is messy. A lot of women will
Mhm.
ask me, like, why can't it just be easy? And I'm like, well, you know, it doesn't have to be hard necessarily. Like, you can choose to make it hard or make it more easeful, but it really is all about how you're going to choose to receive, ultimately the provision that's coming to you. And really everything outside of you is quite masculine in its nature. So as a woman, you're designed to be penetrated and receptive of the lessons, of the learnings, of the teachings, but you have a choice. You can meet that with rigidity and spitefulness and why is this happening to me? Or you can meet it with grace. You can meet it with love. You can meet it with openness. You can meet it with your heart. We have that free will to do that. So we're learning new ways of being. So, that's putting on essentially like a new wardrobe, which sometimes at first it's not going to fit. So giving grace and compassion in that process. And then eventually when we can fully let go of our control and, really soften into a state of surrender, we do open ourselves to what I call the promised land, which is really just co-creative union again with God, like this remembrance of you
Mm.
don't have to carry all the weight of the world and the pressure on your own shoulders. Like God is here to carry this with you and is here to walk beside you. And again, to be in that relationship, you can't be controlling. I always say that
Mm.
the dance with God is like a 90%, 10% dance. Like God is leading 90%, which doesn't mean you're like limp spaghetti, just like getting flung around. Like there's a posture. Like even if you're in a partner dance, like the follow holds a posture. She's maintaining also a frame. So that's where that dance with God is coming in, where you continue to show up with your heart and your devotion and your openness and your receptivity. And God is going to lead you and show you the next step. But then you have free will to follow that or not, and to listen or not, and to decide to control or, really trust the will of God more than your own. Like we have that choice in every moment. So, yeah, I don't even know if that really answered the question, but this control piece is so big for so many of us as women. And really, I do believe it's just inviting us to come back into our bodies and to really prioritize the things that help us feel safe, that help us feel supported, that open us to those states of softness, of gentleness, of compassion, of love, and to really start to lean into this support, building a relationship with God so that you can trust that, again, you don't have to do everything by yourself. There is a force, the greatest force that wants to partner and co-author and, co-create with you in your life. You really get to be open to exploring that, into being held, into being led, in that.
Yeah, you definitely answered my question. I think with control, how it's shown up in my life is how I control in my mind. So it's not so much physical, busyness, or, a lot of women control with busyness. They're just busy all the
Totally.
time. Or, at one point it was substance, but that hasn't been for quite some time. But I remember being in a relationship and the guy was like, "You're like the least controlling person ever," because I would tell him about my controlling tendencies, but he didn't know how I was controlling in the mind, right?
Yeah.
And so I think when we start to recognize how we're controlling in the mind, which can look like self-sabotage, crazy belief systems, patterns, all that kind of stuff, we can dismantle them. And just like you
Totally.
spoke to, come to that version of us, the young person within us that experienced something that decided, well, this is going to keep me safe. And
Yeah.
now it's still showing up
Totally.
in my life. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
That
that, like,
little girl is like, so she is like running the show until we bring awareness and heal her. Like that subconscious part of our mind is what dictates all our current thoughts, beliefs, behaviors, like all of it. And that, yeah, I can so relate to the controlling in the mind, like just, and can be, again, very manipulative as women when we do that. And it's like, yeah, bringing the awareness of how we do that. And gosh, when did I start doing this? Like, how old is this? And like, what part of me is carrying this right now? And how does she need to feel more safe again so that she can trust that she doesn't have to control in this way?
yeah, it's very powerful. And when you're speaking to that, being in the body, I think were the words, like coming back to your body, and what that really anchored in for me is like when we come into our body, we're more in the present moment. Being in the present moment
Yeah.
that's a journey in itself, because there's
Is.
so many distractions to take us out of that. But when we're in the present moment, the mind is quiet and the control has surrendered,
Yeah.
essentially, or softened in a really powerful way.
Yeah. Yeah.
With that dissension into the feminine, and I think one of the most powerful experiences, like recently, I'm working with Christina.
Yeah, we both are. I
Yeah.
love it. Yeah.
And was that just dropping into my womb and descending. And it
Mm.
was like, oh my God, like I do it every night now. I'm like, it just feels so relaxing and nourishing. And like, I'm so in my body,
Yeah.
which is beautiful to experience when there's so much to take us out of that. So yeah,
Yeah.
can you speak to the dissension of the feminine?
Yeah. This is, yeah, it's such a beautiful process of, really, to me, it's like, just I just get this image of like sweet honey and nectar, like moving from the mind to really descend into the body, into the heart, into the womb, and really, yeah, like trusting that we get to be in that place. And again, I think this is tied to, I mean, part of the spiritual warfare that's been happening, especially on women, has been to disconnect us from our bodies, because we do hold the oracular power and wisdom of the womb. So, why wouldn't the enemy want to disconnect us from that remembrance? And, I always say, like, God really gifts us word, and we birth that word through our wombs. Like, the womb is such a powerfully creative portal. Like, it's meant to hold seed and let the seed flourish and ultimately labor the seed, which becomes creation, whether that's babies or projects, creations, legacies, all of these beautiful things that we're meant to birth. But if we don't trust ourselves to be in our bodies, we're never going to labor and birth, those visions. And that's where I think as women, we really do come into this deep reclamation when we fully land and when we really can be in the openness of our hearts and really into the depths of our womb, which is often very vulnerable and very exposing for women at first. Even I remember, again, being in my body, quote unquote, through dance, through even yoga, for 30 years. And even in that, there was still like discipline. And, I know I was like in the process of descending, but it really has only been for me too in like the past like 3 years. I would say that I've been starting to awaken my own oracular power of my womb wisdom and really coming into this big reclamation and restoration in my heart and living from that place. Because we are just so conditioned to live like head up, neck up, and many women will tell me that, like, I don't even really associate with what's below my neck. Like, I just haven't even thought about being there. And that's heartbreaking to me. And, I feel as women too, unfortunately, we haven't had a lot of, rites of passage as women. We haven't been brought through the sacred rites of passage and initiation as women. And that's been really lost. And I feel we are in a major reconciliation of that. And I do feel we're reclaiming a lot of those rites of passages, to guide each other into the body, into the heart, into the womb, and into this oracular power again. And, I pray that our future daughters get to experience this in a really different way than we have. But the body does hold the deepest wisdom. So when we can fully come into our bodies, to me, that's when we really do become liberated. Like when we are really down and in. And again, the feminine is meant to descend, as we really go in, because this is where our intuition lives. The feminine itself is the birther of beauty, of creativity, of inspiration. She is the muse. And I feel as the feminine descends, the masculine then rises. And it's not to mean that the feminine gets less than, so the masculine can become greater than. It's like a circular dance. Like I see this even in my own partnership. The more I can be in my body and rooted in my heart and vulnerable and open and receptive and really just receive him as he is, the more he becomes initiated into his purpose, into his potential, into his vision, into his passion, into his calling. And that's where the co-creative partnership is so beautiful, because we are here to serve each other and to be in this beautiful circular dance of inspiration and birth and collaboration. But to really, be in that as a woman, we have to be down. We got to be down in the body and connected to our root, which again requires a lot of healing. A lot of us have, that's where we store a lot of our trauma as well. So again, this is often a very uncomfortable and scary thing for us to do as women at first. And that's why it's so powerful to have mentors and a sacred support team, as you're really devoting yourself to this work, because it is deep and it's big. And I just feel often, we're only meant to go so far on our own. Like, of all the wisdom lives in you, but there is so much power when we can really be supported, with another, especially woman who's been devoted to this path and has been dedicated to the dissension, to walk beside us and to offer us the remembrance and the safety that we get to also feel as we go deeper into that place.
Yeah. That support in it is so integral and necessary to, it feels like that, even like our relationship with God, but also our relationship with mentors and people that can guide us, as we're not meant to do any of this on our own. And so allowing people to hold us, and it is so powerful. Does anything come to mind for you? Because with your past experiences and birth control and as well abortion, just the womb, and when you're speaking to, or when we were both speaking to a lot of women being up in the mind, a lot of women have had trauma and sexual womb, all that. And so oftentimes we'll completely disconnect because it's not safe in our body. So we'll go
Yeah.
into our mind. And so it's very natural for a lot of women to be disconnected from their body in their mind. And so that coming into the womb and like clearing the birth control, the trauma, all that kind of stuff. Are there any practices that you can share that assist in that healing journey?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So, yeah, lots of different things. And yeah, especially transitioning off of birth control is a really big initiation. I highly recommend working with a skilled practitioner, to assist in that transition because, essentially our bodies, especially if you've been on it for a long time, have been hijacked and often then deal with like a lot of deficiencies that we have to restore and reestablish. So, that piece takes a lot of deep healing on like a nutritional and a digestive level often for a lot of women, but on kind of more like the physical emotional level, one of the big things of healing, and I'm going to bring it back to the earth, I feel as women, as we're starting to connect back to the womb, one of the most powerful things that you can do is to sit your body, especially your bare body, if you can literally be naked and find a place in nature and rest yourself against the soil. Because, and Christina teaches this, but like we literally are magnetic beings as the feminine. We carry that magnetic feminine pull, and the earth, holds her magnetism. And we really can reestablish a lot of that innate magnetism as we let ourselves receive the earth and really let our wombs be held by the earth. And while we're in nature, that is a time that often for many of us can help to establish more peace. And again, that stillness and slowing down so we can really fully breathe, and like focusing on bringing breath down into the low belly, into the womb. And, you can use like the cue of your hands or even hovering your hands just above that space. If it doesn't feel quite safe yet to hold that part of you, just like bring the awareness of your hands just above there and just like breathing in like so deeply and so fully into that space. And then, as we start to center there and connect with our breath and really connect to the earth in that way, there often is, like that inner voice that arises. Like we can listen to the story, and some of that story might be grief, and it might be anger, and it might be sadness that needs to come through. All of our emotions are really held down in the womb, in that space of our root and of our sacral region. So I think a lot of this process too for women is that deep emotional healing and alchemy is like really starting to develop a relationship with your emotions again. Like for me, that was a really big piece because for so long I just stuffed and suppressed and bypassed
Yeah.
and again lived from the mind and just maybe analyzed things, but didn't really feel things, like didn't really transmute anything. And then that led, I think part of my digestive stuff was just years of stored anger that I didn't know how to move through my body. And then eventually, that became an issue. I think all dis-ease, is kind of has some deeper emotional and energetic roots to it. So I think for women too, working with someone or finding a process that supports you in really feeling and really moving that emotional energy through your body in a healthy and a safe way is also something that will connect you to, again, that wisdom of the womb and the power of the womb. But we really get to do that as women and feel safe in doing that, and feeling our emotional landscape is going to bring us deeper into our bodies. So that's kind of what comes to mind, like just here right now. There's of course like so many other things, but I feel, yeah, those are a couple main things that I can feel into as I think about connecting down into the womb and descending into that part of ourselves.
Yeah. I think even just awareness, just people speaking more to the disconnection from the
Yeah.
womb, the inversion, I'll call it, of birth control
Yeah.
as a way to disconnect us from the
Yeah.
womb. We start to bring intention into
Yeah.
it. And that's a portal or a space to
Yeah.
drop in and to start to heal that
Totally.
space within our body that is the portal, like,
Yeah.
and is our magic, the holy grail, the cauldron
Yes.
that holds,
Yeah.
all of our inner wisdom. Can you speak briefly to, or whatever comes up? I don't want to take you too long over time. To interdependent relationship.
Yeah, and this is newer for me. This is like a new exploration in my own life. And again, it took a lot of healing with God and the masculine to
Mm,
really open to interdependent union. Even when I was in partnership in the past, I was very independent, or I would sway. There's been times that I've also been anxious attached. So I've been on like both ends of being very avoidant and very, anxious attached. And ultimately, where I think trying to arrive back into secure attachment and safety, and really finding our wholeness first with God so we can bring that wholeness, into the relationship. And again, hopefully collaborating with a partner who is also devoted to that wholeness in
mm,
themselves so that they can bring that wholeness, into the dance, with us. And yeah, union is such a powerful thing. And again, this is where, we're not sacrificing parts of ourselves, or again, needing things to happen in the relationship or putting conditions onto it. It's really just stepping into relationship for the sake of bringing love where it hasn't gone before. And of course, our relationship's going to challenge us and evolve us and help us grow and trigger us at times, like absolutely, and this is where I feel too a big part of our own initiation is through relationship. There's only so much we can do on our own. That relationship is a divine mirror, and we have to both be devoted and committed to growth and evolution. For sure, in my own partnership, we've been going through our own initiations with communication and like
mm,
safety, and like creating the foundations of that, so that even when a challenge arises, we're not going to feel like our safety is compromised with each other, which was like a big edge for both of us. But I ultimately feel, the masculine and the feminine are designed to complement each other. Like we are meant to be co-creating. And again, that I always think of like the rose analogy. I always feel, like the feminine is the rose, and like the beauty and the inspiration, the creativity, and like the illumination, and just all of these like very nutritive things that she brings. And the stem with the vines is like the masculine, that protector, that frame, the one that holds the direction and the vision, and gives us some safety and stability so that we can really bloom and blossom. But without the rose, we lack beauty and love. And without the stem and the thorns, you know the rose, did I say that right? Without the rose, we would lack beauty and love. So we would have like no expression. And then without the stem, we would die. But like if we didn't
yeah.
have the masculine, we would eventually, just cease flourishing. There would be no more blooming and opening. So we really do need each other, and we get to remember that our differences are really beautiful, and that are the things that are meant to really complement each other within relationships. So it's like, I think breaking through like a lot of the feminist paradigm in which like, you can be better than men. And I think often women are really conditioned too to like want a man, but not need a man. And I
Yeah.
think what we get to remember as women is like, we need men and because men innately need us, and men actually recognize that, like for the most part. I mean, there's definitely spiritual warfare on men and the whole other conversation, but a really masculine man recognizes his need for a woman, like, and
Mm,
that's like a really innate yearning for them. But as women, we've often been very conditioned to feel like I shouldn't need them, and I just need to be independent, I need to do things on my own and carry my way through because of past hurts and traumas and wounds and all the things. So it really does take a lot of bravery and courage as a woman to decide, I actually want and need a man. It's
mm,
not one or the other. Like we get to be together, not out of neediness, but really out of desire, like out of true yearning to deepen, the eros and the logos, really to deepen that love and also the truth, because that's what we're meant to bring together in an interdependent union, is that collaboration of both of those things.
Yeah. That I need a man is such a potent question to ask. And I feel it in my body every time I say it. And it's shifting and shifting and shifting.
Yeah.
And I've said it to clients just to like, what does that feel like in your body? And
Yeah.
it's so, I don't need a man, just the whole
Totally.
dialogue that comes up. And it's just powerful to look at and where that's
Yeah.
coming from and what is actually truth.
Totally. Yeah, our perceptions around that are really powerful to look at, because yeah, if we haven't done those, that deeper healing with the father wound, with God, with, men, our past relationships, like we're never going to fully open to the fullness that, we can really receive from the masculine, and we are receptive vessels. And, I feel too, when we're blocking that receptivity, we do eventually, we get burned out as women. Like we don't like it. Like eventually there will be something in our life that really illuminates like how desolate that place can be.
Yeah.
And again, and I want to say this really clearly as well. It's like you get to really develop the relationship with the masculine first, with that inner masculine frame in yourself. And again, that union with God, because you can really be so deeply fulfilled through that union with God. And again, I always see men, the masculine that might come into your space as being a reflection of God. In my relationship, and my partner knows this, my devotion first is to God and to Christ. And, then that devotion gets to overflow into our space. And because my devotion is first there, there's actually so much more devotional beauty within our relationship, because my heart is so bound to God and to that love, and being a vessel for that love that then gets to overflow into the relationship.
Beautiful. Do you have any stories of synchronicity that you want to share, love?
Yeah, there's, I'll tell you the story of my partner, because this is a fun one and maybe it'll give some inspiration to some women. I had it was a couple years ago, back in 2021. I was sitting on my bed. This was, like a year into developing and devoting a relationship with God. And I was like in a meditation, just praying. And all of a sudden, this face, this very clear face came into my vision, and could see the hair and the eyes and the jawline and all the things. And I sent a voice memo to my friend to tell her, like, I think I just saw my husband in a vision, and to tell her all the details so that we could remember it. And then it was a few weeks later, I was single at the time. My friend had, encouraged me, just go on a dating app. And I'd never used a dating app, seriously before. So I was like very resistant to it. But I also, wasn't in a space of like interacting with men. I worked for myself. Like I wasn't out in this, out and about meeting men like in my day to day. So I decided to do it. And I, had gone on and was like swiping left, to a lot of people, as I'm sure if you've been on the dating apps. But all of a sudden this picture, not even of him, but of like a tent in a sunset, came up. And I was like, oh, that's curious. So I started to scroll down, and I saw, this face, and it was him in his hunting gear. But the face was like so familiar. And I was like, I know this face. And I had messaged, or I liked the photo, and then he messaged me and we initiated a conversation. And then I told him that I was going off the app because I had this very strong feeling in my body, like this is my partner. Like I just knew. And I went off, gave him my phone number, and he, initiated planning a date. And yeah, when he walked up to my house, I had like full body chills, because he just walked up and I received his face, and I was like, that was the face from the vision. Like it was just, and just the essence, because I could sense that from the vision. It was just, yeah, it was really remarkable. And, I owe really all of that to the grace of God. I always say, like, I didn't manifest my partner. I really, truly believe my devotion and my relationship with God, opened me to receive my partner. And, that's why for any woman listening, like, again, that devotional union is so beautiful. And your devotion is what will open you to receive, your desires and the things that you yearn for, but you get to trust, that God has perfect timing for it all. And yeah,
Mm.
it was just a really beautiful moment. And, we've been together for a year and a half and are just building a life together. But yeah,
Mm.
God really, really brought that together for sure.
Beautiful. I love that.
Yeah.
What's been your biggest lesson along the way?
Mm. Grace.
Mm.
And, I rebirthed my community recently over the summer. And when I was praying to God about the new name of the space, like the one word that just kept coming in was grace, 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 grace. And I feel this openness to grace is what really transformed my life. Like I really have been on, a big journey, especially in the last like 15 years of healing, as I'm sure many of us have. I know you have, Lisa, too. And I feel God has just given me the gift of grace, offering grace to myself, like through compassion and forgiveness and acceptance, and just like feeling like I'm worthy of that grace in every moment, no matter what the regret or decision or mistake was. Like I'm still worthy of the graciousness of God, and, feeling God's grace so fully in my life has been the most powerfully healing and
Mm.
transformative thing that I've ever experienced. And that's why I'm so, yeah, devoted to supporting other women and really establishing that grace, for themselves, and really receiving that grace from God. Because I feel when we can really be in that state of grace, we truly are, we're open as women, we're receptive, we're soft,
Mm.
we're loving, we're compassionate, we're trusting, because we know that that grace is a gift and you're
Mm.
always worthy of that gift.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, how do you experience the mysteries?
Mm, I love that question. Yeah, like sitting in space, just the spaciousness, like really trusting in the fertile unknown. And I think just being so present with life, like just being with the smallest of things, I feel the mystery, like especially in my morning walks. Like I really take intentional morning walks to just slow down. And usually I'm not listening to anything. I'm just like walking in nature and just really receiving the beauty,
Mm.
of the creation of the earth, and really like sitting with a flower or a tree and just being like, this is all a part of it. Like, and how incredible that God made all of these things and that we get to receive them and really relish in the beauty of these things, and to just stay so curious. I feel like having a heart of wonder and almost like
Mm.
that childlike innocence is really what helps me stay devoted to the mystery, and to really, yeah, just be like soft in that curiosity, and just in that state of wonder and awe, and walking, in the innocence as a child, and being open. God really asks us to be that way. I feel that we really do receive God when we're in that state of innocence, and when we're not in trying to know and, again,
Mm.
analyze and like, get it all. It's just like, can I just become more curious, and where does that lead me? What does that open me to?
Mm. Yeah. How do you root into the self?
Mm. Yeah, I'd say through like body-based practice, like just my deeper embodied movement, the breath, just being with the dance of life.
Mm.
Like I love dancing, but just being with my body and finding a rhythm and moving in the ways that she wants to move, and really honoring that movement, really helps me to, yeah, just feel rooted and connected to my heart and my body and myself.
Mhm. Beautiful. Is there anything else you want to add to this
Mm.
beautiful conversation before we close, love?
This is such a, Lisa, I'm so grateful to be here, and you asked just such incredible questions.
Mm.
I like am blown away, and just, yeah, and on, and just grateful for being able to have shared this space. And yeah, I guess the last thing I would say is, I say this quite a bit, but I really believe, the ultimate purpose of the feminine is to bring love, where it hasn't gone before. And to really bring that love, we first have to root into that love and feel safe receiving that love. So, whatever you get to do to feel rooted, in that essence of love, I encourage you to do that and open your heart to it, because you are a vessel to birth that and bring that and stretch that, out into the space around you. So just keep trusting that that love is within you, and there's such a pulse of it inside of you, and you just get to be open and willing to really receive the frequency of that.
Beautiful. I love that. The vessel. We're a vessel of love and bringing it into the world. And that's so powerful. Well, it'll be in the show notes where everybody can reach out to you and experience your magic. So thank you so much for this really beautiful conversation.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you so much for joining me for an episode of the Phoenix Rising podcast. Please like, share, download, subscribe if you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you next week for another episode on the Phoenix Rising podcast. Sending so much love.